ESG and the Temptation of Human Security by Jim Kelly, October 4, 2023. The title of my talk tonight is ESG and the Temptation of Human Security. In the first part of tonight's talk, I will provide a brief history of the United Nations ESG and Sustainable Development Agenda. Next, I will explain how the UN's focus on human security inspired the ESG and Sustainable Development Agenda, and how a matrix of human rights governance networks helped advance that agenda. Then, I will describe the quasi-religious nature of the UN's human security, ESG, and Sustainable Development Agenda, and how this quasi-religious agenda is similar in nature to an attempt in France during the first half of the 19th century to promote human security and social order. Next, I will explain the important role that Catholic social teaching principles and solidarism could play in promoting human security through sustainable development. Last, I will warn how the implementation of the UN's human security, ESG, and Sustainable Development Agenda by supranational authorities could undermine democratic evolution and individual liberty. The United Nations ESG and Sustainable Development Agenda. First, let me provide an overview of the UN's ESG and Sustainable Development Agenda. Environmental, social, and corporate governance criteria, referred to as ESG, are sets of standards used by investors to screen potential investments that may impact a company's value. Environmental criteria consider how a company safeguards the environment, including corporate policies addressing climate change. Social criteria examine how it manages relationships with employees, suppliers, customers, and the communities where it operates. Governance deals with a company's leadership, executive compensation, audits, internal controls, and shareholder rights. The ESG movement originated with the United Nations Environment Program Finance Initiative, which, for the sake of simplicity, I will refer to as UNEP. In April 2003, UNEP formed a group of institutional investors, including large pension fund leaders, to examine the materiality of environmental, social, and corporate considerations relating to companies whose stocks are held by funds in which the institutional investors invest. Over the course of several months, the UNEP group analyzed 7 industry sectors to identify specific environmental and social criteria likely to be material for company competitiveness and reputation. They also attempted to quantify the potential impact of those criteria on stock price. Unsurprisingly, the resulting UNEP report placed ESG criteria at the heart of capital market and investment considerations. In the 2004 UNEP report, the group of institutional investors urged corporate managers and board directors to include ESG reporting in their annual reports and financial statements. Also, the UNEP report urged governments to update their financial disclosure regulations to require companies and stock exchanges to specifically disclose ESG criteria. Following closely on the heels of the UNEP report, later in 2004, the United Nations Global Compact group of multinational business leaders published a report titled "Who Cares? Wins: Connecting Financial Markets to a Changing World." In the United Nations Global Compact report, UN Secretary General Kofi Annan invited financial institutions, such as banks, other lenders, and investment firms, to develop guidelines and recommendations on how to better integrate ESG issues in their asset management, securities brokerage services, and associated research functions. At first, multinational business leaders paid little attention to the UNEP and UN Global Compact reports promoting ESG. However, after the Great Recession of 2007-2008, the resulting highly negative public perception of multinational businesses as having distorted and abused global markets to the detriment of millions of investors and households caused business leaders to more robustly embrace the ESG agenda. Indeed, the business-friendly Davos, Switzerland-based World Economic Forum became a focal point for analyzing the future of the ESG agenda and the means for promoting more sustainable development. The World Economic Forum, or WEF, convenes an annual gathering of leaders from corporations, government, media, public culture, and civil society in Davos, Switzerland, and throughout the year in regional locations around the world. The WEF encourages participants to widely disseminate information from these gatherings among their own political, commercial, and intellectual circles. In this manner, well-connected individuals from the World Economic Forum's international elite communities circulate the forum's ideas about global governance under their own organizational names, in the media, in conferences, in testimony, and in their policy recommendations to governments and international organizations. During 2009 and 2010, the World Economic Forum conducted its Global Redesign Initiative, a global, multi-stakeholder dialogue on the future of international cooperation. The Global Redesign Initiative process helped the forum's members and experts develop proposals highlighting potential responses to the post-Great Recession challenge of adapting to a new global business and social environment. The Global Redesign Initiative's ultimate 600-page report was the most comprehensive proposal for redesigning global governance since the formulation of the United Nations during World War II. In the Global Redesign Initiative, or GRI, report, the World Economic Forum concluded 1. That the U.S., the EU, or any grouping of G7, G8 countries can no longer be counted on to make and implement crucial global economic decisions. 2. The Global Redesign Initiative report explained how the realities of globalization have eclipsed the post-World War II hierarchy of nation-states and the existing architecture of international organizations. Third, the Global Redesign Initiative report noted that multinational corporations, international civil society organizations, and larger developing countries have entered the space formerly held by the major northern nation-states and the UN system. Next, the GRI report maintained that economic inequalities and global governance failures are inhibiting the adaptability of the current economic system to continue to grow and prosper. And finally, the Global Redesign Initiative report asserted that the World Economic Forum is the best body suited to develop a new framework for a post-United Nations-based system of international governance. Most likely, the World Economic Forum's proposal for it becoming the world's leading institution for global economic development and social governance set off alarm bells within the United Nations system. In 2015, 5 years following the publication of the Forum's Global Redesign Initiative report, the United Nations unanimously adopted Agenda 2030, a 15-year plan to, quote, end extreme poverty, fight inequality and injustice, and protect our planet, end quote. At the heart of the UN's Agenda 2030 are the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, known as the SDGs, which address global challenges ranging from climate, water, and food crisis to poverty, conflicts, and inequality. The all-inclusive breadth of Agenda 2030 is evidenced by the following short titles to the 17 Sustainable Development Goals: No Poverty, Zero Hunger, Good Health and Well-Being, Quality Education, Gender Equality, Clean Water and Sanitation, Affordable and Clean Energy, Decent Work and Economic Growth, Industry, Innovation, and Infrastructure, Reduced Inequalities, Sustainable Cities and Communities, Responsible Consumption and Production, Climate Action, Life Below Water, Life on Land, Peace, Justice, and Strong Institutions, and Partnerships for achieving these goals. By 2019, these ambitious, some would say utopian, SDGs became one of the key metrics against which the ESG performance of multinational businesses could be measured. In essence, a company's performance on achieving the UN's Sustainable Development Goals significantly determines its ESG rating and, for better or worse, how it is perceived by investors and the broader community. Then, in 2020, as fate would have it, the global COVID-19 pandemic hypercharged the ESG agenda and the pursuit of the Sustainable Development Goals. At the World Economic Forum's 2020 annual meeting in Davos, 120 of the world's largest companies supported the forum's efforts to develop its own set of common metrics and disclosures on non-financial factors for their investors and other stakeholders. These so-called stakeholder capitalism metrics and related disclosures are to be used by companies to align their mainstream reporting on performance against ESG indicators and to consistently track their contributions toward achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. Meanwhile, earlier this year, the European Union adopted a Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive and related European Sustainability Reporting Standards, the breadth and granularity of which go well beyond the reporting requirements in other mandatory and voluntary ESG reporting frameworks. So that's an overview of the development and status of the UN and World Economic Forum's ESG and Sustainable Development Agenda. What does it all mean? Human security at the core of the UN's ESG and Sustainable Development Agenda. The remarkable development and implementation of the UN's ESG and Sustainable Development Agenda in a relatively short 20-year period was no accident. In large part, the success of this effort can be attributed to the UN's visionary approach to human security. In 2003, the UN's Commission on Human Security defined it in the following manner. Quote, human security means protecting fundamental freedoms, freedoms that are the essence of life. It means protecting people from critical or severe and pervasive or widespread threats and situations. It means using processes that build on people's strengths and aspirations. It means creating political, social, environmental, economic, military, and cultural systems that give people the building blocks of survival, livelihood, and dignity. End quote. But how was it possible for a large bureaucratic international organization like the United Nations to exhibit the intuition, flexibility, and expertise necessary to significantly advance its human security agenda? To its credit, at the beginning of this century, the United Nations examined the manner in which a networks approach could be used to address pressing global problems. The UN focused on what is referred to as global public policy networks, consisting of cooperative arrangements among three groups: governments, businesses, and civil society. In 2008, as a student of and sometime participant in this phenomenon, I concluded there exists a matrix of 10 human rights governance networks in which UN Global Governance of Economic and Social Affairs occurs. In 2011, I updated and applied my matrix theory in the context of multinational businesses. The 10 human rights governance networks comprising the matrix, which work in succession, include 1. Advocacy networks, the networks of international human rights activists that articulate and advocate for human rights, including so-called emerging economic and social human rights. 2. Research networks, the networks of social scientists and academics that conduct research on how the lack of human rights protection negatively impacts individuals and society. 3. Policy networks, the networks of government officials and other policymakers that discuss and formulate human rights policies. 4. Standard-setting networks, the networks of multilateral international organizations that meet to adopt treaties or declarations containing or expressing human rights norms or standards. 5. Interpretive networks, the networks of human rights treaty body committees and UN-sanctioned expert committees that interpret the norms and standards contained in human rights documents. 6. Explanatory networks, the networks of UN agency field staff that explain the human rights interpretations to members of civil society at the local, national, and regional levels. 7. Implementation networks, the networks of national legislators that, upon the recommendation of human rights experts, adopt laws promoting and protecting human rights. 8. Assessment networks, the networks of non-governmental organizations that encourage the use of human rights impact assessments by legislatures and businesses to measure the potential human rights impact of proposed legislation or products. Enforcement networks, the networks of local, regional, and national courts that decide cases involving human rights. And 10. Funding networks, the networks of governments, transnational corporations, and private foundations that fund the promotion and protection of human rights by supporting one or more of the other human rights governance networks. As remarkable and commendable as some may view the 2-decade work of the Matrix of Human Rights Governance Networks to advance the UN's human security agenda through ESG and the SDGs, I have the following concerns. First, the matrix is unaccountable to any independent authority. Second, the UN human security agenda is utopian in nature, with no means of measuring its success and no clear endpoint. Third, the ESG movement is a form of supranational corporatism, whereby the World Economic Forum, its business, policy, and government community members, international accounting authorities, global accounting, law, and consulting firms, and transnational bodies such as the European Union combine in an undemocratic manner that undermines national sovereignty. And 4. The UN Sustainable Development Goals represent an allegedly secular, but in reality, quasi-religious catechism of economic and social goals to achieve earthly human security, to which individuals and business leaders are to pledge their loyalty and dedicate their efforts. The use of quasi-religious systems to cultivate sentiment in support of human security. While developing their human security and sustainable development agenda, UN officials understood the importance of building public awareness and favorable sentiments toward it. In a June 2007 article, I examined the features of what I refer to as the Church of the United Nations and compared it to earlier quasi-religious systems designed to promote human security in the first half of the 19th century. First, the Church of the United Nations rejects the natural law theory that persons are born with inalienable rights. Instead, it subscribes to the theory that its gospel, the 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights, declared a host of civil, political, economic, social, and cultural rights, and that it is the job of the United Nations system to define, promote, and secure these human rights for all persons. Second, the Catechism of the Church of the United Nations consists of the interpretive comments on human rights generated by international human rights treaties. Third, the holy days of obligation within the Church of the United Nations consist of the plethora of its official days, years, decades, and observances designed to promote awareness of a global society with shared concerns that dwarf national identities and concerns. 4. The National Bishops' Conferences of the Church of the United Nations consist of the global network of national human rights institutions with which it is in communion. 5. The Church of the United Nations encourages national governments and transnational businesses to examine their consciences by conducting human rights impact assessments in relation to any proposed legislation, programs, or projects to determine and address the manner in which their actions might negatively impact human rights. 6. For transnational businesses, penance consists of participating in the corporate social responsibility and ESG movement and sharing the benefits of commercial research and intellectual property. Here's a timely aside that, in a small way, supports my theory about the Church of the United Nations. 2 weeks ago, in London, while taking a break from a conference in which I was participating, during a walk back from a nearby park, in the window of a small office building, I read a sign celebrating Global Goals Week from September 15 through 24, 2023. The sign described Global Goals Week as, quote, an annual week of action, awareness, and accountability for the Sustainable Development Goals, end quote. Above the office window, from a flagpole, there was flying a flag on which appeared the symbols for each of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. As you can imagine, I did not salute it. In my view, the manner in which the UN and World Economic Forum are promoting human security through ESG and the Sustainable Development Goals is similar to the technocratic internationalism which the Saint Simonian movement engaged from 1825 to 1850. The French social scientist Henri de Saint-Simon was the first person to attempt the synthesis of religion and social science. Late in his career, Saint-Simon realized that, absent a religious instinct on the part of the masses, a purely scientific approach to restoring social order in early 19th century France was doomed to failure. Convinced that historic Christianity had run its course and would be unable to adapt itself to the needs of the new society, Saint-Simon proposed his New Christianity to remind men, quote, of the interests common to all members of society, of the common interests of the human race, end quote. The key features of Saint-Simon's New Christianity included, first, New Christianity is to direct humanity toward the rapid betterment of the condition of the poorest and most numerous class of society. 2. Worship should be regarded only as a means of reminding men of philanthropic feelings and ideas, and dogma should consist only as a collection of commentaries aimed at the general application of these feelings and ideas to political developments, or to encouraging the faithful to apply moral principles in their daily relationships. Third, nations must abandon their own interests and adhere to principles of a universal morality which promotes the good of the whole human race. 4. Scientists, artists, and industrialists should be made the managing directors of the human race. And 5. Any theology that tries to teach men that there is any other way of obtaining eternal life except that of working for the improvement of the conditions of human life should be condemned. In 1825, Saint-Simon died before fully articulating his vision for New Christianity. Nevertheless, his followers, the Saint Simonians, spent the next 7 years advancing Saint Simon's vision for a scientifically planned society, the members of which would be inspired by New Christianity. The Saint Simonians produced a series of lectures critically examining the structure of contemporary European society and proposing a program for total social reorganization. In one of their later lectures, published in May of 1829, the Saint Simonians explained the importance of cultivating religious sentiments in support of a human security agenda. Quote, "Without those sympathies that unite man with his fellow men and that make him suffer their sorrows, enjoy their joys, and live their lives, it would be impossible to see in societies anything but aggregations of individuals without bonds, having no motive for their actions but the impulses of egoism." End quote. Let me be clear. Of course, I believe that the UN's human security and sustainable development agenda has merit, but only when promoted with respect for the democratic process, individual liberty, and the rule of law. In this regard, Frederick Bastiat's observation in his 1850 manifesto titled "The Law" is instructive. Quote, "If you exceed this proper limit, if you attempt to make the law religious, fraternal, equalizing, philanthropic, industrial, literary, or artistic, you will then be lost in an uncharted territory, in vagueness and uncertainty, in a forced utopia, or, even worse, in a multitude of utopias, each striving to seize the law and impose it upon you. This is true because fraternity and philanthropy, unlike justice, do not have precise limits. Once started, where will you stop, and where will the law stop itself?" End quote. So, is there an alternative to the potentially coercive, quasi-religious, technocratic internationalism represented by the UN and World Economic Forum's Human Security, ESG, and Sustainable Development Agenda? A role for Catholic social teaching and solidarism. In my opinion, there is no reason why the United Nations and World Economic Forum should have a monopoly over the creation and management of a global economic system. Nor should they be engaged in indoctrinating young people and adults in sentiments favoring human security and sustainable development. One alternative is to facilitate the growth of local and national economies that embrace Catholic social teaching principles and the related solidarist economic model. In 1891, as the debate over the merits and shortcomings of capitalism and socialism was being waged, in his Rerum Novarum encyclical, Pope Leo XIII offered a middle way, consisting of economic and social principles that form much of the foundation for what is referred to as Catholic social teaching. In Rerum Novarum, Pope Leo offered the following observations. First, as people naturally differ in capacity, skill, health, strength, inequalities will exist. 2. The pains and hardships of life on earth will never end, and no program or system will succeed in banishing them from human life. Third, transferring the possessions of individuals to the community at large would rob the lawful possessors of their natural rights of ownership and creative production, distort the functions of the state, and deprive wage earners of the ability to use their wages to better their condition in life. Fourth, the law should favor ownership and induce as many people as possible to become owners, thereby bringing the respective classes closer together. Fifth, owners and employers should respect the dignity of their workers and should not misuse them in the pursuit of gain. And sixth, the state should promote moral rule, family life, respect for religion and justice, the imposition of fair public taxes, the progress of the arts and of trade, and the abundant yield of land. A decade later, building on the principles of Rerum Novarum, Jesuit scholar Henri Peche used the Church's moral principles and understanding of man as the foundation upon which to erect his economic system, called solidarism, or, quote, the solidarity system of human work, end quote. According to Father Pesch, 1. There is a solidarity among all men because of their common humanity, and especially among people in the same nation and within the same occupation or industry or area of the economy. 2. Society should promote voluntary occupational groups or bodies in various industries. This is an example of corporate solidarism. 3. The proper shaping of the human soul, individual virtue, and the family are prerequisites to economic reorganization. 4. Solidarism rejects the socialist suppression of private ownership of the means of production and distribution. However, socialization requires companies to promote the common good. 5. Competition is valuable and plays a crucial role in economic life, but only human dignity can be its ordering principle. 6. The worker cannot be reduced to a mere factor of production, nor can economics be reduced to mere economic calculation. 7. Respecting subsidiarity, the state should first look to the family and to religious and civil society groups to provide for the needy and assist only when necessary to prevent injustice or harm. To their credit, the UN and World Economic Forum have recognized the importance of the so-called social and solidarity economy. Indeed, the World Economic Forum has created a global alliance for social entrepreneurship, which recognizes the vital role social innovators can play by offering new approaches and disruptive services in situations where traditional institutions and markets have failed. Because they prioritize long-term social objectives, social entrepreneurs can tackle deep-seated problems in areas such as environmental sustainability, health, education, and rural development. Yet, the question remains whether the UN and World Economic Forum will respect the solidarity principle and the importance of national economies favoring a moral, pro-family orientation. For solidarism and other models for advancing human security to succeed in a globalized economy trending towards centralization and uniformity, government leaders must protect and promote democratic evolution at the national level. The need to respect and promote democratic evolution. Clearly, the United Nations and World Economic Forum's human security, ESG, and sustainable development agenda consists of a supranational corporatism and technocratic internationalism that could threaten the democratic process and national sovereignty. Democratic evolution, which I first described in a 2007 article, is marked by the articulation of philosophical views about the ideal social order that, over time, are embraced by political leaders, government officials, and the public. As these philosophical ideas are debated among citizens in private and ultimately in the political process, they coalesce into identifiable value systems, which, because they relate to the human person and society, can be labeled as humanist. Ultimately, courts are called upon to determine the propriety or limits of each new humanist value system. These court battles establish a legal framework for further social evolution. Although there are different varieties of humanism, in general, each of the humanist movements embodies, quote, the perennial need of human beings to find significance in their lives, to integrate their personalities around some clear, consistent, and compelling view of existence, and to seek definite and reliable methods in the solution of their problems, end quote. In my opinion, democratic evolution in America has consisted of 12 different humanist phases: creative, deistic, civic, social, scientific, transhumanist, secular, ethical, democratic, evolutionary, integral, and political. Each of these humanist systems arose to solve a specific perceived cultural shortcoming of the prior humanist period. In essence, each humanist system represented an effort to create the ideal social order and thereby promote the happiness of citizens. Creative humanism is based on the idea that the practice of the Christian faith and Christian values has a positive impact on the formation and restoration of democratic societies. Deistic humanism is based on the idea that God, though responsible for creating the world and humans vested with certain inalienable rights and duties, is like a watchmaker who, once creating the universe, no longer intervenes in daily life. Civic humanism, which is based on the idea that social order is rooted in a love of country and in values that encourage sacrifice on behalf of the common good. Social humanism is based on the idea that improvement in the lives of the lowest and most numerous class of citizens depends on the abilities, educational training, and work of an elite intellectual and creative class of individuals. Scientific humanism is based on the idea that social order depends on the application of evidence-based scientific principles to the problems of human development and social life. Transhumanism is based on the idea that technology can be used to overcome the biological limitations of man and improve the human condition. Secular humanism is based on the idea that traditional religious beliefs and practices cannot be used as the basis for morality and decision-making in the public square. Ethical humanism is based on the idea that humans require a non-theistic moral and ethical value system upon which they can rely in order to bring justice and peace to the world. Democratic humanism is based on the idea that positive human development can only be achieved through the free exercise of civil and political rights. Evolutionary humanism is based on the idea that each person has the right to define one's own concept of existence, of meaning, of the universe, and of the mystery of human life. Integral humanism is based on the idea that the human person consists of both supernatural and temporal elements, and that a person's faith is an integral part of all aspects of his or her daily life. Political humanism is based on the idea that elected officials should exercise their political power and regulatory authority to achieve equal access to human security and, if necessary, wealth redistribution. It seems that, for now, an activist-driven political humanism is ascending, frustrated by conservative or popular resistance at the national level. Transnational progressives are pressuring businesses, governments, and supranational institutions to use the human security, ESG, and sustainable development agenda to build a global welfare state and spread progressive social and cultural values throughout the world. In this regard, the following observation contained in Friedrich Hayek's 1944 classic, The Road to Serfdom, is instructive. Quote, "Instead of designing the most rational, permanent framework within which different persons can conduct their various activities according to their individual plans, modern planners demand a central direction of all economic activity according to a single plan, laying down how the resources of society should be consciously directed to serve particular ends in a definite way. The politics which are now followed everywhere, which hand out the privilege of security now to this group and now to that, are nevertheless rapidly creating conditions in which the striving for security tends to become stronger than the love of freedom." End quote. Epilogue. Pope Francis's vision for the promotion of human security through global governance. On October 4, 2023, the same day, the feast of St. Francis of Assisi, as I delivered the above remarks at the University of Warsaw in Warsaw, Poland, in Rome, Pope Francis published his apostolic exhortation Laudato Deum. 8 years had passed since Pope Francis published his encyclical Laudato Si, in which he expressed his, quote, heartfelt concerns about the care of our common home, end quote. In Laudato Deum, the Holy Father updates his views about the climate crisis. Quote, yet, with the passage of time, I have realized that our responses have not been adequate, while the world in which we live is collapsing and may be nearing a breaking point, end quote. In several respects, the Holy Father's observations share theoretical spaces with my earlier insights about human security, global governance, human rights networks working in an uncoordinated manner around the world, democratic evolution, a catechism of rules for respecting and promoting human security, the UN organizing local, national, and regional communities to build the global welfare state, and human rights advocates seeking to hold multinational businesses accountable for promoting human security. In connection with his addressing the, quote, climate crisis, quote, in Laudato Deum, with references to his 2020 encyclical Fratelli Tutti, Pope Francis first invokes human security as justification for the pursuit of global governance, paragraph 35. He acknowledges that there is a matrix of human rights governance networks, paragraphs 37 and 38. He supports democratic evolution at the local, national, and global levels, paragraph 42. He explains that establishing global and effective rules is needed to consolidate respect for the human rights and social rights generated through democratic processes, paragraph 42. He calls for democratizing global governance to provide spaces for organizing communities to improve the welfare of those with little power, paragraph 43, and he criticizes those who use meritocracy as a screen behind which a few with great power consolidate their privileges and generate inequality, paragraph 32. In Laudato Deum, Pope Francis contemplates what I refer to as a, quote, human security milieu, end quote, created by transnational institutions, the purpose of which is to judge whether bottom-up democratic evolution in each nation liberates marginalized and disadvantaged peoples and advances human security by conforming to or improving upon established rules pertaining to internationally recognized economic, social, and cultural rights. In the human security milieu, it is up to international and transnational organizations, such as UN human rights treaty bodies, the Court of Justice of the European Union, the European Court of Human Rights, and ESG monitoring and reporting agencies to consider the merit and acceptability of human security outcomes produced at the national level. This is an elitist, quasi-religious, technocratic internationalist, supranational corporatist, and global political humanist formula, which most likely will undermine national sovereignty, democratic evolution, and individual religious and economic liberty. Simply put, the UN Human Security and Sustainability Agenda and its resulting human security milieu place too much faith in transnational progressives and their partner authoritative agencies, bodies, and courts, which, most likely, are populated by well-intentioned experts who are too far removed from and unaccountable to the peoples whose lives they so significantly impact.